Welcome back to Chapter 5 of Broken Blade. I'll be reading after Pierre has started his journey with the other voyageurs up north, and he's still meeting some pretty interesting people. This chapter is called Massacre Island. Massacre Island. By late afternoon, the brigade reached the wide place in the Ottawa River called the Lake of Two Mountains. Pierre's hands were puffy and blistering from all the paddling. His arms and shoulders ached, and his shirt was soaking wet with sweat. Charbonneau commanded, "Ship oars," and Pierre and the crewmen rested their paddles on the gunwales. "That's only 25 miles today, fellas," the steersman said, "but we're going to make up for our holiday tomorrow on the Long Sault." It's spelled S-A-U-L-T, but I'm guessing it has to do with something like Sault Ste. Marie type of thing or something along those lines. Pierre wanted to ask Charbonneau if he was joking about today being a holiday, but he feared Charbonneau was probably serious. Just then, McKay and Le Petit pulled alongside. "So which camp will it be, sir?" Le Petit asked. "We usually take the north side," McKay replied. It's the North Shore then," Charbonneau agreed. "And how about a little race to see who gets to tend to the fires tonight?" Le Petit looked towards Pierre. "Are you sure you're up to that with this crew of babies?" A shout rose above the other voices. "Last canoe to shore gathers all the firewood." Oh no, that sounds horrible. Yells went up from the other crewmen, and in an instant the water was churning with the force of paddle blades. Amazed at the sudden energy, Pierre did his best to keep up. It was less than a half mile to the campsite, but that was way too far for Pierre. Once he slipped on his forward stroke and splashed Emile. Another time his paddle twisted sideways. Charbonneau yelled, "Pull, LePage, pull!" His voice was a whiplash. Pierre glanced over his shoulder for help. Charbonneau nodded urgently at his own paddle and showed him how to make a smooth stroke, but Pierre's tired muscles managed only a weak chop. You ever get the feeling that this is just not Pierre's thing? It might have been his dad's, but this isn't his thing. By now, the blisters on his right hand were bleeding. When the last canoe in the brigade passed them, Charbonneau said, "Till another day, men," and they slowed to their normal pace. No one was in a hurry to reach shore, and the teasing was so sure to be happening when they reached it. Can one bad paddler in 12 mean that much, Pierre wondered? If he didn't improve, he knew he was going to be a burden on his group. The whole crew. He remembered his father's advice: pull your own weight, and you'll find no better companions than your canoe mates. Le Petit was waiting on the beach. "Glad to see you made it, fellas. I thought maybe you got lost and we needed to send out a search party." The crewmen laughed. Pierre hunched down and tried not to be noticed. Even the quiet one, Bellegarde joined in. "Hey, ladies," they called out as they unloaded. "You might need some help, but maybe you need help with those real heavy parcels? Ha ha, ha 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 ha." It was a big day of shopping, no? Oh man, they're just being mean. The catcalls continued as they carried the freight up the bank. After they finished, Charbonneau asked Pierre, "How's my middleman?" Though Charbonneau's voice was kind, his eyes were cold gray and that of a soldier on a mission. Pierre could tell that he hated weakness. "Fine, sir," Pierre said, hiding the crusted blood on his palm. But Lalande was right behind him. He took hold of Pierre's hand and turned it over. "It's the right one, eh? The hand closest to the water is always taking a beating. Well, water softens the skin." "It's all right." Pierre closed his hand as tightly as he could. "Just the same," Charbonneau said, "we're going to keep you on port side tomorrow. The sore one should dry out then." "Your other hand might get beat up, though." Lalande agreed. "That should help." "My hands were plenty soft when I was your age." Pierre couldn't imagine the broad-shouldered bowman ever having anything but rough, calloused hands. But he appreciated Lalande's gentle tone. Pierre prayed that switching sides would help. He worried that another day of paddling would turn his palm into mincemeat. Gathering firewood wasn't as hard as Pierre expected. It felt good to work out the kinks out of his legs, and he tried to carry more than his share of the wood. As he bent to collect some kindling, Pierre felt the pain in his bottom for the first time. He wondered if the thin slats in the canoe seats would ever leave permanent creases on his backside. Emile Duval approached him. "If you feel a little stiff, that's pretty normal," Emile said, brushing some hair out of his eyes. "How long does it last?" Pierre asked. He was grateful for Emile's concern and knew that Emile would be truthful with him. In a couple weeks, you're going to feel like you've been canoeing your whole life. Besides, paddling is nothing compared to a day with Naggy Maggie. Pierre smiled, recalling the nickname the older boys called Sister Marguerite. Pierre had to admit the sister could be mean at times, especially to inattentive students. How nice of you to grace us with your presence, Monsieur Duval, she would greet Emile as he returned to school after a week of work in the fields. Emile meant to comfort Pierre, but 2 weeks sounded like forever. Since Emile was used to plowing and grubbing stumps and pitching hay, paddling was like a vacation for him. But the small chores that Pierre had done around the cabin left him unprepared for this brutal work. To make matters worse, he worried that his years of schooling might have made him too soft to endure this voyage. What if his studies turned him into a pale coward, a creature too frail to do anything but turn the pages of a book? Though he hated to admit it, Pierre knew that he would rather do a month of algebra lessons than repeat a day of labor that bloodied up his hands. The evening meal was lye-soaked corn, boiled with a slab of salt pork. That didn't appeal to Pierre, but the crewmen quickly lined up at the 10-gallon kettle. They took their portions on tin plates and they shoveled them down their throats. They sat anywhere they could, on a log, on a rock, on bare ground, and some didn't even bother finding a seat. They just stood and ate. Some of the men used homemade spoons, others ate with their hands and tipped their plates to lick up the last of the few morsels. Beloit remembered his spoon but couldn't find a plate. Not caring to borrow a tin, he ate his meal right out of his sweat-stained hat. And he sucked his fingers clean. Ugh, that just sounds horrible. Pierre looked away to keep from vomiting. After dinner, the men relaxed with their pipes. Sitting before the fire and drawing out their tobacco pouches with great ceremony, they packed their clay bowls tight and then lit them with tapers pulled flaming from the coals. There was little talk. From that moment, it seemed right to just sit back and soak in the silence. Pierre watched the fire fall to embers as the first full dark night came on, and the air was heavy with the scent of choke cherry blossoms and birch catkins. The far-off music of the rapids drifting over the camp made it easy for Pierre to forget about his blisters. It was Lalande who broke the spell. "Captain," he said as he crossed the fire to McKay, "it's amazing what a powerful thirst a day's paddling can bring." "Would you like to borrow my cup then?" McKay said, "to fetch a good draft from the river? To tell you the truth, I was thinking of something a little bit more lively." "More lively than the Ottawa?" Lalande was quiet until Bellegarde and Michael Larocque, the wiry little middleman who helped the bowman lead his songs, appeared a minute later. Each man had a keg of brandy under his arm, and Bellegarde announced proudly, Mr. McKay has ordered the liquor ration for the trip issued." The crowd cheered. "We drink to Commander McKay." Pierre was amazed at how quickly the men turned from quiet to loud with their cups already in hand. The day they had worked in the storehouse with La Petite, the big man explained that a few ounces of liquor were allotted to each man in the brigade. It was just enough for some small celebrating, but no voyageur would ever head north without his ration of brandy. McKay nodded politely to the men and then retired to his tent. As he walked past McKay, the commander noticed the boy's frown. "I'm not being unsociable, lad. I'm just not a drinking man. The company says to issue liquor, so I give them their little bit of poison early in the trip, and then I'm done with it." Pierre and Charbonneau were the only ones to abstain. Charbonneau said he'd sworn off spirits several summers past, and everyone assumed Grandpa was too young. As Pierre took a seat, remember they called Pierre Grandpa, as Pierre took a seat on an aspen log, Beloit teased him. "Is our little lady friend afraid to taste something stronger than milk?" Charbonneau reached out a hand to hold Pierre back. Pierre was mad at that, obviously, but it was too late. Pierre was up and digging in his pack for a cup. The first sip of brandy nearly gagged him. It burned his throat and nose and eyes and started watering, but he choked down a few more swigs. If he couldn't paddle like a voyageur, at least he was going to start to try to drink like one. The men celebrated at the same frantic pace as they paddled and ate. Clustering around the fire, they sang bawdy songs and took turns telling stories. A short while later, Larocque stepped forward and announced, "Is it time for the test?" Several men took on his challenge. To Pierre's surprise, the test was jumping over the campfire. The men leaped over the fire the short way and then the long way. Others joined in, laughing and clapping. But after the fourth round of drinks, Larocque decided to make his course, as he called it, more challenging. He piled fresh wood on the roaring fire and waited until the flames were crackling high. Then he leapt. Oh, this guy's a genius. And he singed his leggings a little bit, but others were quick to accept this new challenge. When Lalande took his turn, Pierre asked Charbonneau, "Why does Lalande have such white hair? He doesn't look that old." "He isn't. All I can say for sure is that it happened one summer about 10 years back. He left for the English River with hair the same kind of blonde as yours. When we came back, he was pure white. He wouldn't say what happened, and it wasn't my place to ask. But I met a fellow once who was up on the English that spring, and he claimed that there was an accident. A north canoe capsized in the rapids just before the ice melted. Several men drowned. Lalande was the only one to survive. There's no telling what happened for sure." Just then there was a shout. Pierre turned to see Jean Beloit trip Lalande as he leapt over the fire. His body twisted sideways and he landed on his shoulder in the coals. A roll set him clear. His leather shirt saved his back, and Emile and Bellegarde saved his hair by throwing a blanket over his head. What is wrong with these guys? Half stunned in the sand, Bellegarde brushed Lalande off and helped him to his feet. Then, before anyone could blink, Lalande yelled, "You dog!" and he leaped for Beloit's throat. So there was going to be a fight, I guess. That's how they get ready to go to sleep. Lalande's hair was still smoking as the two men went down. They grappled and punched with a fury that was certain to end in death. Almost done with this chapter. A circle formed and everyone was cheering on his favorite. "Beloit's gonna kill him," Emile said. By the tone Pierre said, he could tell he was disappointed that the reverse wasn't true. "Come on, Lalande, get him!" Fearing that the good-humored nature would get hurt, actually. Pierre clenched his fist, swung it in the air. Pierre was getting into this. He wished he could pummel the evil Beloit himself. The crewmen alternately cheered and sipped their brandy, and a man offered to fill Pierre's cup, but he shook his head. Pierre already felt dizzy from the strong drink, and when he tried to focus on the grappling fighters, their faces were blurry. Twice Lalande and Beloit rolled dangerously close to the fire, but Bellegarde rolled them away. When it was clear neither man would gain an advantage, Charbonneau yelled, "Let's give Beloit a dram of his own poison. A little singe will do him good." Bellegarde agreed. The next time Beloit rolled towards the fire, everyone stepped aside. It took Beloit a while to realize that his moccasin was on fire. Oh my goodness. When the pain finally hit him, he let out a shout and rolled his opponent into the brush. Bellowing like a wounded bull, he kicked off his smoking moccasin and leaped feet first into the shallow water. Pierre expected Beloit to return with a knife. Oh. But he was grinning when he came back from the river. "Well fought, Havernant," he said. Lalande returned the compliment. "You gave me more than I wanted, Jean." And they hugged. Oh my gosh. This is so weird. And Beloit sat down in the sand and wrapped up his burned foot with a red cap, and Lalande poured his opponent a drink. "Is it like this all the time?" Pierre asked Charbonneau. "It's mainly the first few nights that get wild. When the tensions of waiting all winter get back at their paddles, when it mixes with brandy, things get crazy." As he waved towards Lalande and Beloit. There you have it. A few men already crawled under nearby canoes tonight to retire for the night, so Charbonneau and Pierre decided to do the same. "I think it's best we take shelter," the veteran advised. "The air gets chilly this time of the year." They found a Montreal a few paces from the campfire and laid their blankets under the hull. Pierre was exhausted, but he couldn't fall asleep. Oh, that's a horrible feeling. The ground is bumpy, and every turn forced his hip or elbow against a rock. Even worse, Charbonneau was already snoring, and Beloit and Lalande kept chatting. They wouldn't be quiet. Pierre suddenly had a headache now from the alcohol. "You see that island just on this side of the rapids? Well, what about it? Maybe the moonlight's playing tricks on me, but I swear we could be looking at Massacre Island. The one up on Lake of the Woods where La Vérendrye's men were murdered in 1836. I think that's maybe 17, we'll say back in 36. How's that? My old partner, Joe Leclerc, told me that his father was part of the party that found the bodies. All 19 of them were slashed and cut and laid on buffalo robes in a circle. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. Leclerc said his dad had nightmares for the rest of his life. Lalande whistled softly, and then it was quiet. A short while later, Lalande crawled under the far end of the canoe, and Beloit laid right down in an open part of the ground a few paces away. Both started snoring immediately. Pierre turned over and over again, but sleep would not come. When he finally drifted off to sleep, he dreamed that his dad and mom were sisters lying in a circle on a huge buffalo robe with their arms over their head. That's not good. But their faces were smiling as bravely as they had this morning when they said goodbye to him. But in the center of the circle lay a silver hatchet, and next to it, Beloit's cap, and heaped to the top of severed thumbs. Oh, come on. That's chapter 5. That's how it ends. That's not a good image. But on that note, chapter 6 starts next time, and have a good time listening to this story. Or thanks for listening to this story.